Hello everyone, welcome to yet another sessions of the daily news analysis by SRIRAM'S IAS, where we take up the important articles featuring in the Hindu newspaper and break them down for our understanding from the examination point of view. With this, let's take up a look at the important articles for the day. The important articles which we've taken up from the newspaper are on the screens, and let's take up the first article for the day. The first article talks about the much awaited 5G auction which the center has announced, and this article features on page 1 as well as page, if I'm not wrong, page 12. So both these articles talk about the 5G auction, wherein it reads 5G will drive significant advancements, say analysts. So we'll talk about the 5G auction, what are all the points surrounding the 5G auction, and about the 5G spectrum and technology, as to what exactly is the 5G technology, what are the uses of this technology, and what are the new points which the auction has brought out. So let's start our discussion first of all by understanding what is 5G technology. So when we talk about 5G, what do we mean by 5G? 5G is nothing but the G means generation. So which means that this is the 5th generation of internet processes. Before this, 4 generations have already come, and they are determined by the internet speeds and the efficiencies of the network with which the internet works. And the newest network on this is the 5G network in India, which is to come. Even though after 5G works on 6G and all has also become, but currently the technology which is to be entered into India is the 5G technology. So what is the characteristic of this 5G technology? This 5G technology will be extremely high in its internet speed, where if 4G technology used to reach 100 Mbps or 1 Gbps speed, the speeds for 5G would be upwards of 20 Gbps. What does this mean? Gigabyte per second. So this is going to be the speeds for 5G, which is extremely high, and that is why it is being touted as a revolutionary technology with extremely low latency. What do we mean by latency? It is the lag in the internet browsing which we face. So when the 5G technology will come, it will be equipped with extremely low latency, where the speeds being high, the experience of browsing and surfing would be extremely seamless. So that is the characteristic of 5G. Now, how will this 5G arrive in the market? So whoever such as the mobile operators or service operators who would be providing us this with this 5G internet first have to lease out this spectrum from the Indian government, and to lease that out, the central government holds a auction for this 5G technology. Now, how is this auction hold? How does this technology get to be auctioned and reach the operator and the bidder? So we'll understand that process of auction. So first of all, this auction of the airwaves has been scheduled on July 26th, before which a pre-bid conference is going to happen on June 20th with respect to all the potential bidders and operators of the 5G network. So before understanding the 5G auction details, we are looking at the news which is about the 5G auction which the government has put out. So the important new point in the auction news that has come out is about the 5G captive 5G networks. Now, what does this mean? It means that apart from the telecom operators and service providers who would be able to participate to buy the spectrum bands in the auction, there would be also private networks. The big corporations such as Apple, Amazon, Google, Meta, all of these companies who require, who have so much bandwidth for work and who can purchase specific personalized 5G spectrum bands. So the auction has flown open for them this opportunity as well, where they can buy their own private 5G networks or 5G bands through which it will facilitate them to run high internet speed dependent operations such as machine to machine operations, AI operations, Internet of Things, all of this to enable all of these services to them. The captive 5G network has been enabled in this auction. So it will ensure digital transformation and augment industry efficiencies. It will increase their efficiencies and lead to greater economic benefits for not just the corporation, but to consequently the service they would provide to the consumers and therefore to everyone. And the unique thing about the auction is that operators can surrender spectrum bands after 10 years without any liability. So now, whichever bands these companies or these operators will buy, they have the flexibility to surrender these bands without any liability. So that's also a favorable point which has been kept for the bidders in the 5G auction. But the only issue that the analysts are saying is about the base price, which they expected to be a lot lower, and it is for some companies it can be said as quite high for them to participate in the auction. So that is an issue with few companies, but other than that, the auction is slated to be starting on July 26th. Now, when we talk about the 5G auction, how exactly is an internet technology being auctioned and how does it reach to the service providers? So when we talk about 5G auction, what exactly is auctioned over here are the airwaves. When we talk about airwaves, these are those waves in the electromagnetic spectrum. We study about the spectrum which range from infrared waves, X-rays to gamma rays. So these are these invisible rays through which the internet technology and all the media that is to be transferred travels through this medium. And this medium, which is controlled by the government, is being given or leased out to companies, and that is known as the 5G spectrum auction, where the spectrum of this airwaves, the bands of frequencies through which these airwaves can travel are basically leased out to the operators and companies. So that is the concept of spectrum auction. Let's try to understand what is spectrum. It refers to the invisible radio frequencies, right? So these are the radio frequencies that wireless signals travel over, and these bands are the subject of the auction. So those signals are what enable us to make calls from our mobile devices, tag our friends on Instagram, call an Uber, and pull up directions to a destination and do everything on our mobile devices. So that what makes them possible are the radio frequencies, and these bands are what are going to be leased out in the auction. Like I said, these frequencies are only a portion of what is called the electromagnetic spectrum, right? So these waves, which are grouped in bands, these bands are actually being auctioned to the companies. And these bands are grouped together depending on their wavelengths, basically the distance over which the wave's shape repeats. So when we talk about a wave, this particular distance is known as the wavelength. So based on the wavelength, the waves are grouped together and they are known as bands. So in the 5G auction process, there are multiple bands that are going to be available for the operators to purchase and bid for. And these bands operate between the radio spectrum, which includes frequencies of 3 kilohertz to 300 gigahertz. So this is the range in which the waves operate, right? So now let's study about these multiple bands. How does this spectrum work and what are the different types of band which are available in the auction process? So because a range of spectrum frequencies can be used for cellular communications, different bands have slightly different characteristics. So they have different strengths and limitations as well. So for the purpose of wireless communication, we can think of spectrum in three categories: low, mid, and high band spectrum. So there are three bands. One is the low band spectrum, one is the mid band spectrum, and one is the high band spectrum. So what do we mean by low band spectrum? When we mean low, it means that it is denoting the frequency, where the frequency of the waves is going to be less than 3 gigahertz. So the waves travel longer distances with minimal signal interruption. So low band spectrum gives minimal signal interruption. Today's wireless networks are built primarily on low band spectrum, and the wireless industry has used this spectrum to build high-speed wireless networks that cover 99.7% of Americans. So current network is based on the low band spectrum, which gives minimum signal interruption, but the internet speeds are not that high. The internet speed increases when we increase the frequency. When we come to mid band spectrum, this is between 3 and 24 gigahertz. This blends the characteristics of both low and high band spectrum, providing a mix of coverage and capacity. What is the high band spectrum characteristics, which runs above 24 gigahertz? Now this, since the frequency is very high, the wave travels within the distances in much shorter distances and not miles compared to low band spectrum, but offers high capacity and ultra fast speeds. So the characteristics of high band spectrum is the ultra high speeds, and the 5G network is best experienced in the high band. So the strength of low band spectrum is that the signal interruption is less, but speed is not that high. The strength of high band spectrum is that the distances would be much shorter and the speeds would be ultra fast. And the mid band spectrum is a balance of both these characteristics. So these three bands are going to be available for auction for the companies, where they can buy multiple or one of the bands. With addition to this, there has been another additional band which the government has will be putting out in the auction, which is the new millimeter wave band. This is a part of the high frequency band, wherein the frequency increases again from over 24 gigahertz to 100 gigahertz. So this again, since it has a short wavelength, it would be delivering greater speeds. So the characteristics again is fast, ultra fast internet speed. This is the characteristics of the millimeter wave band, which again characterizes lower latency. The surfing would be seamless and makes data transfer efficient and seamless, as the current available networks work optimally only on lower frequency bandwidths. Like we saw, major networks currently work on low band. So these are going to be the characteristics of the 5G spectrum, which the operators would be able to buy. And what are the use of 5G? Using 5G, the new age future technologies which are AI or machine learning or Internet of Things, which require much amount of internet speeds, would be finally possible. So this is the discussion with respect to the 5G auction and the 5G spectrum, which I thought that with respect to the news, the tech science and technology part of it is important to understand for us. With this, let's move on to the next article. The next article, which appears in the newspaper, talks about the in Sri Lankan crisis, a window of economic opportunity. Now the author takes use of the ongoing interaction which is going on in Sri Lanka, which is facing a crisis, and talks about the roadmap ahead for India and Sri Lanka together in the future. So what has been happening in Sri Lanka? We know that there has been a financial as well as now a economic and food security crisis in Sri Lanka due to certain policies by the Sri Lankan government, such as banning the fertilizers, shifting to organic crop or organic farming, depleting forex reserves, resulted in much economic crisis for Sri Lanka, which also resulted into political crisis for them. Consequently, they are trying to recover from the situation, and in this aspect, India has come to its aid. Right? We hear a lot about India's aid in the news. India has been able to help Sri Lanka massively in the past few months, where the total aid by India has been around $3.5 billion, in which every day we hear news about India sending food, medicines, fuel, and kerosene to Sri Lanka, because such is the extent of the crisis that Sri Lanka is facing shortages of these basic fundamental commodities such as food, medicines, and fuel. That is the gravity of the crisis, and India has come to Sri Lanka's aid with respect to providing all of this. And with not just this, recently the government of Sri Lanka and the Export-Import Bank of India have signed additional $500 million line of credit for procurement of urea, which is a type of fertilizer. Like I said, the crisis of fertilizer is what triggered the Sri Lankan crisis in one part. That is why India is helping Sri Lanka procure the urea fertilizer as well. What do we mean by line of credit? It's a system of giving loans to an entity in a installment manner. That's the concept of line of credit. So that is also being provided by India to Sri Lanka. And while Sri Lanka is approaching the International Monetary Fund for aid, India is also pushing Sri Lanka's case for IMF to grant that aid. So in whatever capacity India can help Sri Lanka, it is being doing so. And not just India, on the state level, for Tamil Nadu as well, Tamil Nadu government has helped Sri Lanka with respect to 123 crore amount aid, supplying 40,000 tons of rice, 137 types of life-saving drugs, and 500 tons of milk powder, again supplying with the fundamental commodities which the Sri Lankan people are facing the crisis of. This has been the extent of India's and its states' aid. So in this backdrop, the author talks that India has done a good job recently to come to India's aid, where not other countries have been able to do so. And with this, the author tries to build a picture that therefore this calls for a greater sub-regional interaction, where now with this crisis forward, India and Sri Lanka build a greater relationship forward, which is India's policy for neighborhood first. This is India's policy, where India wants to keep its neighbors close and it wants to help them whenever possible. So it is according to that policy for India. But are there any problems in between these two nations? There are some problems with respect to the relationship between India and Sri Lanka, where the Sinhala majority community still looks at India with suspicion. Now we know that the majority community in Sri Lanka is the Sinhali speaking community, or the Sinhala community, and the minority is the Tamil community. And India, having helped in a lot of issues, intervened in a lot of issues in Sri Lanka, and there were in the past also reports about India helping the Tamil rebels, which quite soured the relationship between the Sinhala majority, and the perceptions about India still holds this problem, and therefore they still look at India with suspicion. But this is being bridged increasingly by India's help. So India's help is being appreciated by all people, and its help will go a long way in bridging this gap. Then others are several projects in the past that either got cancelled or are stalled. So all efforts in the past to deepen the relationship between India and Sri Lanka have not really materialized the way India or Sri Lanka would have wanted, where a collaboration between NTPC, which is an Indian public sector enterprise, and the Ceylon Electricity Board for a thermal power plant based in Sri Lanka was signed, but it did not materialize. Simply, India was to develop Colombo's East Container Terminal, which was a tripartite agreement between India, Japan, and Sri Lanka, which again did not materialize. And very recently, under the guidance of Honorable Minister for Roadways and Waterways, Nitin Gadkari, he also proclaimed that they would be building a sea bridge and tunnel connecting Rameshwaram in Tamil Nadu to Talai Mannar, which is in Sri Lanka. Again, this project has been stalled, and it is not showing much progress yet. So this is to show the stalled nature of the projects between India and Sri Lanka, which the author points out that up until now, the relationship has not been very favorable yet. But with the kind of crisis Sri Lanka is facing and India coming to its help, there lies a good future ahead where India and Sri Lanka can come again together and make use of this sub-regional economic union that they can form due to the connected geography and connected human connections which both these nations have. So they have a lot of potential for cooperation where both these countries can come together on the front of infrastructure, especially India coming to the help to Sri Lanka to build its infrastructure with respect to ports, harbor, all plants, all the kinds of projects which we are stalled earlier can be intensified, and India can help in the sector of infrastructure. Similarly, in the sector of energy as well, where there is a talks about linking the power grids with India with that of Sri Lanka. If this happens, it would be a great connection link between India and Sri Lanka. And the author suggests to develop the East Coast, which has huge potential for tourism, trade, and commerce. Again, talking about India helping to develop the economy of Sri Lanka so that it gets to recover from this crisis and the relationship gets better. And apprehensions in the mind of Sinhalese people can be bridged by genuine help in times of crisis, and greater people-to-people interactions, which India is intensifiedly doing and which will help in this particular point. With respect to that, both countries we know that have a strong connection with Buddhism. So Buddhist monks can be facilitated to travel not just in North India, but in Andhra Pradesh as well. So all the Buddhist monks who have interest in the Buddhist pilgrimage places in India can be facilitated, and again, people-to-people interactions can be increased through this, and tourism can be increased through this. And therefore, all of this can be instrumental to realize this call for an economic union, which the author says that is the right time for these two nations to achieve. Right. So this was the discussion with respect to the growing India-Sri Lanka communications and the favorable and good relationship that they can have in the future. Right. So with this, let's take up the next article. The next article, which we can see in the newspaper, appears as a picture which becomes important for us from the art and culture point of view, which features in prelims or in GS1. Now, the picture that we see is about few individuals in Kerala mock fighting in a paddy field, right? This is a wet paddy field which we can see, and these are individuals which are mock fighting. They are not really fighting, but they are mock fighting. So what is this ritual? This ritual is the Oachira Kali festival, or Oachira Kali ritual, which is a festival that takes place in June in Oachira in the state of Kerala, in the Kollam district in Kerala. This is the famous festival that occurs, and it is a mock battle. As we saw, they're not really fighting, they are enacting a battle between two groups to the sound of drums in a waterlogged field called Padanilam at the Oachira temple, which is again in Kerala. So this is the ritual. And why is it celebrated? It is celebrated in commemoration of the Battle of Kayamkulam, fought between the Maharaja of Travancore Martand Varma and the Raja of Kayamkulam on the plains of Oachira temple. So the ritual is to enact these battles that happened between Maharaja of Travancore and Maharaja of Kayamkulam. And then they say that kids today copy WWE, but I think that it's coming from much past events. So the Padanilam or battlefield is a paddy field adjacent to the famous Oachira Parabrahma temple, and the festivities are a part of ritual associated with the shrine. So this becomes important for us because this is a famous practice which can be featured in the prelims examination. With this, let's take up the next article. The next article again appears as an ad posted by the BRAC organization, or what we had seen earlier. This ad is for the Grand Challenge India call on diagnostics for neglected tropical disease, lymphatic filariasis. Now, what is this disease? Why is the Department of Biotechnology and this organization, along with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, asking for newer diagnostic techniques for this disease. What is this disease? We know that the diseases feature in the prelims examination a lot and frequently, and therefore this disease becomes important for us from the perspective of science and technology, which can be useful for us from the point of view of prelims examination. So what exactly is lymphatic filariasis? The picture can suggest a better understanding, where mostly all of us would have seen this kind of a disease, which is commonly known as elephantiasis. Right, this is the disease which is commonly known as, and let's study about few pointers of the disease. So lymphatic filariasis, commonly known as elephantiasis, is considered as a neglected tropical disease, which means that it generally occurs in the tropical region. It is the second most disabling disease after mental health. So basically it disables the person in a lot of sense. It impairs the lymphatic system and can lead to abnormal enlargement of body parts. So the picture that we saw, it enlarges the body parts, causing pain, severe disability, and social stigma as well, right? Because it's not very pleasant to look at. That is why people who suffer through it also face social ostracization. And the lymphatic system is a network of vessels and specialized tissues that are essential to maintaining the overall fluid balance and health of organs and limbs, and importantly are a major component of the body's immune defense system. So how does this lymphatic system gets compromised? It gets compromised and the disease is caused via worms. And these worms are vectors which carry these diseases. So it's a vector-borne disease caused by infection with parasites classified as nematodes or roundworms. So there are worms which enter the body, 3 types of thread-like worms, which causes this disease. And for this, when the worms enter that particular organ, they infect that particular organ, causing the damage of the lymphatic system and enlargement of that body part and causing severe pain. So what is the scenario in India with respect to elephantiasis? It poses a grave threat to India because an estimated 650 million Indians across 21 states and union territories are at risk of lymphatic filariasis. And over 40% of the worldwide cases are found in India. This is a huge number, and that is why India, since a long time, is facing the crisis of elephantiasis. And that is why the news, where the Department of Biotechnology is looking for better and efficient diagnostic technologies and curing technologies for the treating of elephantiasis in India. And therefore, the government launched the Accelerated Plan for Elimination of Lymphatic Filariasis in 2018 as a part of the intensifying efforts towards elimination, and later rolled out IDA treatment. This is a triple drug treatment suggested by WHO. So India rolled this in a phased manner. So this is the effort taken by Indian government with respect to the high prevalence of elephantiasis in the country, right? With this, let's move on to the next article of the day. The next article, which features in the newspaper, talks about the fragile state of nuclear disarmament, right? The topic and the discussion of nuclear disarmament and nuclear warfare has again gained momentum due to the Russia-Ukraine war. And what has happened due to the Russia-Ukraine war, we'll talk about that. And the central point about this article is the SRIRAM'S report. What is this organization? What kind of report does it bring? We'll talk about that. And therefore, this article becomes important for us from the point of view of science and tech in GS3, where we study nuclear technology, right? And it also becomes important for us with respect to all the organizations from the perspective of GS2. Now, the SRIRAM'S report, or Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, is an organization which does research with respect to the military expenditure or defense expenditure which various countries make. And it has recently released its yearbook on military expenditure, and India, it has proclaimed that India is the highest importer of arms among all the countries, followed by Saudi Arabia, Egypt, China, and Australia. These 5 countries make up 38% of the global arms imports. So these 5 countries in which India has been touted as the topmost arms importer of all nations has been, they account for 38% of global arms imports. This is the finding of the SRI report, which is a research organization on defense expenditure. Now, what is this happen and how does this report become important in this backdrop? What has happened due to Russia-Ukraine war? We keep hearing about news of Russia threatening to use nuclear warheads and weapons on Ukraine, and whosoever threatens its security, what that does is that it creates fear and pressure in other nations, and what they have done is that consequently they increase their defense expenditure. So all the countries, not just India, have increased their defense budget, and what this does essentially is that it takes away the crucial allocation which could have gone for development and has to be assigned to defense expenditure. So therefore the war and the dangers of war like this put heavy burden on the defense expenditure of all the countries, where one country increases the budget, the other country also does not want to lie behind, and it also increases its budget. So the war has forced all the countries to increase their defense budget, which the report points out. And that is why what has happened is that those countries with nuclear warheads, in which US stands at the top, which has around 5,000, Russia stands at the top with around 5,900 nuclear warheads, and the USA is second with 5,400 warheads, and only few nations are there with the nuclear weapons. And that is what is the problem, where these few nations stop other nations from gathering nuclear warheads. So this is the gist of the report which it has pointed out, and it says that unless and until the discussions are held pragmatically over the nuclear warfare and the usage of nuclear warheads, the future is very gloomy, and it needs to be treaded with caution with respect to the usage of nuclear weapons. So this was the discussion on the nuclear disarmament and today's discussion on all the important articles. We'll meet tomorrow again with the important articles for the day. Thank you.